They say humans are weak. Soft flesh, fragile bones, short lives barely spanning a century. The Galactic Council has always whispered this behind closed doors, watching our species stumble through space like children playing with fire. We're the newcomers, the primitives who somehow managed to crack faster than light travel despite our obvious limitations. But there's something the galaxy doesn't understand about humanity. Something that's been carved into our DNA through millions of years of surviving ice ages, plagues, wars, and extinction events. We don't just endure, we remember. Every slight, every betrayal, every drop of innocent blood spilled. Ambassador Sarah Chen was supposed to be our olive branch to the stars, a diplomat who could smooth over the misunderstandings that kept arising between human colonies and alien territories. She was brilliant, patient, and genuinely believed in peaceful coexistence. The perfect representative for a species trying to prove it belonged among the stars. What the Carathian Empire didn't realize when their champion warrior Vextar drew his plasma blade in that council chamber was that they weren't just attacking a human ambassador. They were about to discover why humanity had clawed its way from cave-dwelling primitives to interstellar civilization in just 10,000 years. They were about to learn that when you hurt one human, you don't just face that individual's wrath. You face something far more terrifying, you face all of humanity, and humanity never forgets. This is the story of how the mighty Carathian Empire learned that lesson in the span of exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes. Ambassador Sarah Chen adjusted her formal diplomatic robes as she walked through the crystalline corridors of the Galactic Council station. The morning light from the nearby star system filtered through the transparent aluminum walls, casting rainbow patterns across her path. She carried herself with the quiet confidence that had made her Earth's most successful interstellar diplomat, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun that somehow made her appear both professional and approachable. Today's session would be crucial. The territorial disputes between human colonies and the Carathian Empire had been escalating for months. 3 human settlements had been attacked, their populations forced to evacuate. The Carathians claimed the worlds were within their ancestral boundaries, despite clear evidence that humans had legally purchased the rights from the previous inhabitants. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this mediation, studying every law, every precedent, every possible angle that might lead to a peaceful resolution. The council chamber was already filled when she arrived. Representatives from dozens of species sat in their designated sections, the hall designed to accommodate everything from the crystalline Zephyrians to the gas-breathing methane collective. The architecture itself was a testament to galactic cooperation, with environmental controls that allowed every species to participate comfortably. Sarah took her seat in the human section, noting the empty chairs around her. Earth had deliberately sent only a small delegation to avoid appearing aggressive. It was a calculated show of good faith that she hoped the Carathians would appreciate. Across the chamber, she could see the Carathian delegation in their imposing battle armor, their reptilian features hidden behind ornate helmets that served both ceremonial and protective purposes. The Carathian Empire was one of the oldest and most militaristic civilizations in the galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds through strength and cunning, building an empire that spanned 3 star systems. Their culture revolved around concepts of honor, strength, and territorial dominance that often put them at odds with newer species trying to establish themselves in space. High Chancellor Mordun of the Altarian Confederacy called the session to order, his forearms gesturing gracefully as he outlined the day's agenda. The Altarians had served as neutral mediators for over 1,000 years, their natural telepathic abilities making them excellent at detecting deception and finding common ground between conflicting parties. Sarah rose when called upon, her prepared statement carefully crafted to acknowledge Carathian concerns while firmly establishing human rights to the disputed territories. She spoke clearly and respectfully, presenting evidence of legal land purchases, environmental impact studies, and proposed compromise solutions that would benefit both species. The Carathian response came from war leader Thexmal, a massive figure whose scarred armor told the story of countless battles. His voice rumbled through the chamber's translation systems as he dismissed human claims with contempt. According to Carathian law, he declared, strength determined territorial rights, not the paper contracts of weak species who could not defend what they claimed to own. The debate continued for 2 hours, with various council members offering suggestions and asking clarifying questions. Sarah remained patient and professional even when the Korathian responses became increasingly hostile. She had expected this resistance and had prepared counterarguments for every point they raised. It was during a recess that she first noticed Vextar. The Korathian warrior stood apart from his delegation, his attention focused entirely on Sarah rather than the political discussions around him. Unlike the other Korathians, who wore ceremonial armor appropriate for a diplomatic setting, Vextar was dressed for combat. His plasma rifle was clearly visible, as were the various bladed weapons attached to his belt. Such equipment was technically legal in the council chambers under diplomatic immunity laws, but highly unusual for peaceful negotiations. Sarah's security training kicked in immediately. She had spent 3 years learning to recognize threats after an assassination attempt early in her diplomatic career. Vextar's posture, his weapon placement, and especially his unwavering focus on her movements all triggered warning signals in her mind. When the session resumed, Sarah found it difficult to concentrate on the proceedings. Vextar had moved closer to the human section, ostensibly to get a better view of the speakers, but Sarah could feel his eyes tracking her every movement. She discreetly activated the emergency beacon concealed in her diplomatic pin, sending a silent alert to Earth's security forces. The signal would take several hours to reach human space, but it would at least provide a record of what happened here. The tension in the chamber was building as the afternoon wore on. War leader Thexmol's rhetoric became increasingly aggressive, speaking of human infestation of Korathian space and the need for cleansing actions to restore proper order. Several neutral species began calling for calm, but the Korathian delegation seemed intent on escalating the conflict. Sarah was preparing to offer another compromise proposal when she saw Vextar's hand move to his weapon. Time seemed to slow as her diplomatic training warred with her survival instincts. She could call for security, but that would shatter any hope of peaceful resolution. She could retreat, but that would be seen as weakness and might make war inevitable. She could try to de-escalate through words, but Vextar's body language suggested he was beyond reasoning. The decision was taken out of her hands when Vextar suddenly roared a Korathian battle cry and drew his plasma blade. The weapon ignited with a sound like tearing metal, its blue-white energy field casting harsh shadows across the chamber. Panic erupted immediately as representatives dove for cover or rushed toward the exits. The Altarian security forces began moving to intervene, but they were positioned too far away to reach Sarah in time. Vextar leaped across 3 rows of seats with the enhanced agility that all Korathian warriors possessed. His blade swept towards Sarah's neck in a killing stroke that would have decapitated her cleanly. She threw herself sideways, her diplomatic training finally giving way to the basic human instinct to survive. The plasma blade missed her throat by inches but caught her shoulder, slicing through her formal robes and searing the flesh beneath. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, like being branded with white-hot metal. She hit the floor hard, rolling to avoid Vextar's follow-up strike. Blood flowed freely from her wound as she scrambled behind an overturned desk. The smell of burned flesh filled her nostrils, and she could feel the edges of the plasma burn continuing to sizzle against her skin. Vextar advanced methodically, his reptilian features twisted with savage satisfaction. The Altarian security forces finally reached them, but Vextar was ready. His combat experience showed as he fought off 3 officers simultaneously, his plasma blade cutting through their energy shields like paper. More security personnel were converging on their position, but Sarah realized with growing horror that they might not arrive in time to save her life. Vextar cornered her against the chamber's rear wall, raising his weapon for a final strike. Sarah looked up at her killer, seeing the triumph in his yellow eyes. She thought of her family back on Earth, of the peace she had tried so hard to achieve, of the war that would inevitably follow her death. The plasma blade descended toward her heart just as the first Altarian stun blast struck Vextar in the back. He staggered but didn't fall, his Korathian physiology allowing him to shake off attacks that would have dropped most other species. The blade wavered but continued its deadly arc. Sarah closed her eyes and waited for the end. The killing blow never landed. When she opened her eyes again, Vextar was writhing on the floor, overwhelmed by multiple stun blasts from the arriving security forces. His plasma blade had shut down automatically when he lost consciousness, its energy field dissipating harmlessly. Medical teams rushed to Sarah's side as war leader Thexmol's voice boomed across the chamber. He denounced the attack, claiming that Vextar had acted without orders and brought shame upon the entire Carathian delegation. It was a politically convenient response, but Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. This was exactly what he had wanted, a violent incident that would justify whatever response the Carathians had been planning. As the medics worked to stabilize her plasma burns, Sarah watched the Carathian delegation preparing to leave. They showed no real concern for her condition, no genuine remorse for the attempt on her life. Thexmol even seemed pleased as he filed his official protest against the security force's excessive response to what he claimed was merely a cultural misunderstanding. Sarah knew better. This had been planned, calculated, and executed with deliberate precision. The Carathians wanted war, and they had just manufactured the perfect excuse to claim they were the injured party when humanity inevitably retaliated. What they didn't understand was that humans had been fighting longer and more viciously than any species in the galaxy suspected. Earth's history was written in blood, genocide, world wars, conflicts that had raged for generations and ended entire civilizations. Humans had learned to fight dirty because they had never been the strongest species on their own planet. As the medical team prepared to transport her to the station's hospital, Sarah felt the emergency beacon in her pin continuing to transmit. By now the signal would have been received and processed by Earth's diplomatic corps. The recording of her assault would be reviewed, analyzed, and forwarded to the appropriate authorities. The Carathians thought they had just eliminated a troublesome negotiator and created justification for their territorial ambitions. What they had actually done was sign their own death warrant. They simply didn't know it yet. Admiral Marcus Kane was reviewing fleet deployment reports when the priority alert chimed through his command center aboard the ESF Retribution. The massive dreadnought hung in space above Earth's moon, its dark hull bristling with weapons systems that represented the cutting edge of human military technology. Kane had been expecting routine updates from the Outer Colonies Defense Force, not the urgent diplomatic emergency signal that was now flashing across his screens. The message was brief and devastating. Ambassador Chen had been attacked during peace negotiations. The assault had been recorded and transmitted before the attack, confirming premeditated intent. Initial medical reports indicated severe plasma burns but stable condition. The Carathian delegation had withdrawn from negotiations and was claiming diplomatic immunity for the perpetrator. Kane's jaw tightened as he read the details. Sarah Chen was more than just Earth's most skilled diplomat, she was his daughter's godmother, a family friend who had bounced his children on her knee during holiday visits. The woman who had dedicated her life to preventing the very kind of war that now seemed inevitable. Within minutes of receiving the alert, Kane was implementing Protocol 7, a response plan that most of the galaxy didn't even know existed. The protocol had been developed after humanity's first encounters with hostile alien species, when it became clear that traditional diplomatic protections meant nothing to civilizations that viewed humans as primitives unworthy of respect. The first phase involved activating the Human Intelligence Network, a web of agents, informants, and sympathizers that had been carefully cultivated throughout known space over the past 2 decades. Most galactic species assumed that humans were too new to space travel to have developed sophisticated intelligence operations. They were catastrophically wrong. Commander Lisa Torres received Kane's coded transmission aboard her merchant vessel in the Carathian border system. To outside observers, she was simply another human trader dealing in rare minerals and exotic goods. In reality, she was the coordinator for 17 deep-cover operatives who had spent years building relationships within Carathian society. Torres immediately activated her network, sending seemingly innocent business communications that contained hidden instructions. Within an hour, human agents throughout Carathian space were beginning to gather information about military positions, defensive capabilities, and potential civilian targets. Agent Michael Harrison was attending a cultural exchange on the Carathian homeworld when he received his activation orders. For 3 years, he had posed as an anthropologist studying Carathian military traditions, his genuine academic credentials providing perfect cover for his intelligence activities. His Carathian contacts trusted him completely, often sharing strategic information they would never reveal to official diplomatic channels. Harrison's first priority was locating the exact position of every Corathian military installation. The species was proud of their martial heritage and had never bothered to truly conceal their defensive positions. After all, who would dare attack the mighty Corathian Empire? Harrison smiled grimly as he began compiling targeting data that would have taken traditional reconnaissance months to gather. Meanwhile, Dr. Elena Vasquez was monitoring communications from her research station in the neutral zone. Officially, she was conducting studies on interstellar radiation patterns. Unofficially, she was operating one of the most sophisticated electronic surveillance systems ever deployed by human intelligence. The station's advanced sensors could intercept and decode transmissions from across 3 star systems. The Corathian military's confidence worked against them here as well. Their communications were heavily encrypted, but they followed predictable patterns that Vasquez had been studying for years. She began intercepting orders for fleet movements, supply requisitions, and status reports that painted a detailed picture of Corathian military capabilities. Back on Earth, Kane was coordinating with Director Sarah Mitchell of the Terran Defense Intelligence Agency. The TDIA had been formed specifically to handle threats that conventional military forces couldn't address. Their headquarters, buried deep beneath the Swiss Alps, contained some of humanity's most closely guarded secrets. Mitchell had already initiated Phase 2 of Protocol 7, which involved activating sleeper agents within alien governments throughout the galaxy. These were individuals who had been recruited, trained, and placed years earlier, often without their host governments realizing that they were working with humans at all. On the council station where Ambassador Chen lay recovering, maintenance worker Jorik Ventel received a subtle signal that changed everything. The reptilian alien had been recruited 2 years earlier when human intelligence discovered his gambling debts to some very dangerous individuals. Rather than expose him, they had quietly paid off his debts in exchange for occasional favors. Now those favors were being called in. Jorik began copying security footage from the council chambers, communication logs between delegates, and, most importantly, the complete recording of the attack on Ambassador Chen. The evidence would be crucial for the propaganda war that was about to begin. Similar activations were occurring across the galaxy as the human intelligence network came online. Alien bureaucrats, military officers, corporate executives, and even crime bosses who had been cultivated as assets over the years suddenly found themselves receiving new instructions. Most had no idea they were part of a coordinated intelligence operation spanning dozens of worlds. The third phase of Protocol 7 involved economic warfare. Earth's Financial Intelligence Unit, led by Director Robert Chang, began implementing measures that would cripple Corathian trade within hours. Humans controlled more interstellar commerce than most species realized, having leveraged their natural adaptability and risk-taking nature to establish trading relationships throughout the galaxy. Chang's team began activating economic weapons that the Corathians didn't even know existed. Human-controlled shipping companies suddenly developed mysterious delays that prevented Corathian goods from reaching their destinations. Alien banks that had established partnerships with Earth began freezing Corathian accounts pending routine security reviews that would take months to resolve. The Corathian energy exports, crucial to their economy, found their primary distribution networks suffering from simultaneous system failures. Transportation companies reported equipment malfunctions that grounded cargo ships throughout Corathian space. Even communication relays began experiencing intermittent outages that disrupted coordination between Corathian worlds. Within 6 hours of the attack on Ambassador Chen, the Corathian Empire was beginning to experience the first symptoms of economic strangulation. Their leadership initially dismissed these problems as coincidental technical difficulties. They would soon learn how wrong they were. Phase 4 involved information warfare on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Human intelligence had spent years mapping the communication networks, social structures, and psychological weaknesses of every major alien civilization. Now that knowledge was being weaponized. Dr. Amanda Foster led the Psychological Operations Division from her secure facility in orbit around Jupiter. Her team had developed sophisticated profiles of alien mentalities, understanding exactly how different species processed information and made decisions. They began crafting propaganda campaigns specifically designed to exploit the fears and prejudices of various galactic populations. The message was simple but effective. The Korathians had violated the most fundamental principles of galactic civilization by attacking a diplomat during peace negotiations. They were dangerous barbarians who threatened the stability that allowed interstellar trade and cooperation to function. Any species that supported them would be considered complicit in their crimes. The propaganda campaign was subtle but devastatingly effective. Rather than crude human broadcasts that could be easily dismissed, the messages were delivered through trusted local sources who had been cultivated as assets. Alien journalists received anonymous tips about Korathian military preparations. Business leaders learned about the economic risks of maintaining ties with a rogue empire. Religious groups were reminded that diplomatic immunity had been sacred for over 1,000 years. On Korathia Prime, war leader Thexmol was beginning to realize that something was seriously wrong. His economic advisors were reporting widespread disruptions to their trade networks. His intelligence officers were struggling to maintain communications with their operatives in other systems. Most disturbing of all, his diplomatic contacts throughout the galaxy were becoming increasingly cold and unresponsive. Thexmol had expected human retaliation, but he had imagined military strikes against border worlds or economic sanctions through official channels. This coordinated assault on every aspect of Korathian society was beyond anything he had anticipated from what he considered a primitive species. The final phase of Protocol 7 was the most terrifying: kinetic warfare preparation. Admiral Kane was coordinating with fleet commanders throughout human space as they began implementing Operational Plan Thunder God, a military response doctrine that had been developed specifically for scenarios involving the elimination of hostile alien civilizations. Unlike the traditional military strategies employed by most galactic species, Thunder God was based on human understanding of total war. Earth's history had taught humanity that some conflicts could only be resolved through the complete destruction of enemy capability to resist. The plan called for simultaneous strikes against every aspect of Korathian civilization: military bases, industrial centers, population hubs, and even cultural sites deemed important to their morale. Fleet Admiral Zhang Wei aboard the ESF Nemesis was already moving her task force toward Korathian space. The stealth ships under her command had been designed using technology that most aliens couldn't even detect, let alone counter. They would arrive at their targets unobserved and strike without warning. Admiral Kane reviewed the preliminary intelligence reports flowing in from human agents throughout the galaxy. The Korathian military was formidable but predictable, following traditional strategies that had worked for centuries against conventional enemies. They had never faced an opponent like humanity. The reports confirmed what human intelligence had suspected: the Korathians were planning a full-scale invasion of human space. They intended to use Ambassador Chen's attack as justification for protective action against human aggression. War leader Thexmol was already issuing mobilization orders to his fleet commanders. Kane smiled coldly as he realized the Korathians' fatal mistake. They were still thinking in terms of traditional warfare between roughly equivalent civilizations. They didn't understand that they had just declared war on a species that had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, global plagues, and world wars through sheer bloody-minded persistence. Humanity had learned to fight not just to win, but to ensure that their enemies could never threaten them again. The Korathians were about to receive an education in the difference between conquest and extinction. As the final pieces of Protocol 7 fell into place, Kane sent a single coded message to all human military commanders throughout the galaxy: "The ambassador sends her regards. Initiate Thunder God. Leave no one to mourn them." The galaxy was about to learn why humans had survived long enough to reach the stars. Some lessons, Kane reflected, could only be taught through demonstration. Captain Sarah Reeves guided her stealth reconnaissance ship through the outer edge of the Korathian home system, her vessel's advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to their detection systems. The ship was a marvel of human engineering, combining stolen alien technology with innovations that no other species had imagined possible. Its quantum displacement field didn't just hide the ship from sensors, it technically existed in a slightly different dimensional phase, making detection virtually impossible. The ESF Silent Observer had been monitoring Korathian military movements for the past 18 months, gathering intelligence that would now prove invaluable. Reeves watched her screens as they displayed the full might of the Korathian fleet preparing for what they believed would be a glorious war against the primitive humans. 800 warships hung in formation around Korathia Prime, their hulls gleaming with the ceremonial war paint that Korathian culture demanded before major campaigns. The sight would have been intimidating to most species, but Reeves had studied human military history. She knew that the largest armada ever assembled on Earth had contained over 6,000 vessels during the climactic battle of the Third Global War. Humans understood scale in ways that most alien species couldn't comprehend. More importantly, the Korathian fleet was concentrated in a single location, following military traditions that emphasized the psychological impact of overwhelming force. It was tactically sound against enemies who fought according to galactic conventions. Against humans who had learned warfare in environments where surprise attacks and asymmetric tactics were the norm, it was a fatal mistake. Reeves activated her ship's advanced sensor suite, recording detailed scans of every Korathian vessel. The data would be transmitted back to Earth within minutes, allowing human military analysts to identify weaknesses and develop specific countermeasures for each ship class. The Korathians had no idea they were being studied like laboratory specimens. On the surface of Korathia Prime, war leader Thexmol was addressing his assembled commanders in the Great Hall of Victories. The massive chamber was decorated with trophies from a dozen conquered worlds, a reminder of Korathian military supremacy that had lasted for over 800 years. Thexmol's speech was being broadcast throughout the Empire, rallying support for the coming war. What Thexmol didn't know was that his words were being recorded by Agent Michael Harrison, who had managed to gain access to the ceremony through his academic contacts. The speech would be incredibly valuable for human propaganda efforts, as Thexmol explicitly outlined Korathian plans to enslave human populations and strip their worlds of resources. Harrison listened with professional detachment as Thexmol described humans as soft-skinned parasites who needed to be cleansed from Korathian space. The war leader's rhetoric was designed to inflame Korathian nationalism, but it would have the opposite effect when broadcast to neutral species throughout the galaxy. Civilized aliens would be horrified by the casual discussion of genocide and slavery. Meanwhile, throughout human space, the final preparations for Operation Thunder God were nearing completion. Unlike the Korathians, who were massing their forces for a traditional campaign, human military doctrine emphasized simultaneous strikes from multiple directions. The goal wasn't just to defeat the enemy fleet, it was to eliminate their entire capacity to wage war. Admiral Elena Vasquez had moved her carrier group into position at the edge of Korathian space, using techniques learned from Earth's submarine warfare to remain undetected. Her ships were equipped with experimental weapons that combined human ingenuity with salvaged alien technology. The Korathians were about to face armaments they couldn't imagine, let alone counter. The carrier ESF Yorktown carried a complement of fighters unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Human pilots, enhanced with neural interfaces that allowed them to react faster than biological reflexes normally permitted, flew ships that existed partially outside normal spacetime. They could appear inside enemy formations, strike with devastating force, and disappear before defensive systems could respond. Admiral Kane's flagship, the ESF Retribution, was leading the largest human fleet ever assembled. 200 ships drawn from throughout human space, each one crewed by veterans who had spent their lives preparing for this exact scenario. The fleet included vessels that most aliens didn't know existed, projects that had been developed in complete secrecy over the past decade. The most terrifying of these was the ESF Ragnarok, a ship designed for a single purpose, planetary destruction. Its experimental quantum torpedo system could destabilize the nuclear structure of a planet's core, turning entire worlds into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The weapon had never been tested on an inhabited world, but computer simulations suggested it would work exactly as designed. Dr. Amanda Foster was coordinating the information warfare aspects of Thunder God from her orbital command center. Her psychological operations teams had identified the key leaders, cultural figures, and communication nodes that held Korathian society together. When the military strikes began, simultaneous cyber attacks would cripple their ability to coordinate resistance. The human approach to information warfare was based on understanding their enemy's psychology at a fundamental level. Korathians valued honor, strength, and hierarchy above all else. Foster's teams had crafted messages designed to shatter those beliefs by demonstrating that their leadership had led them into an unwinnable conflict through pride and stupidity. The propaganda campaign would reveal how completely human intelligence had penetrated Korathian society. Names, dates, and classified information would be broadcast that could only have been obtained through extensive espionage networks. The message would be clear: humanity had been watching and planning for years while the Korathians remained oblivious to their danger. On the council station where Ambassador Chen was recovering, the political situation was deteriorating rapidly. Neutral species were beginning to take sides as the full scope of the Korathian threat became apparent. The attack on a human diplomat had violated treaties that formed the foundation of interstellar civilization. High Chancellor Mordun of the Eltarian Confederacy was struggling to maintain order as delegations demanded immediate action. The Korathian withdrawal from negotiations had made their intentions clear, but the Council's traditional approach to conflict resolution seemed inadequate for the crisis they now faced. What most Council members didn't realize was that humanity had never intended to rely on traditional diplomatic solutions. The Council served useful functions for routine disputes, but humans had learned long ago that some enemies could only be dealt with through force. The time for talk was over. Ambassador Chen herself was conscious and monitoring the situation from her hospital bed. Despite her injuries, she was coordinating with Earth's diplomatic corps to ensure that neutral species understood exactly what was happening. Her attack had been filmed and recorded from multiple angles, providing undeniable evidence of Korathian aggression. Chen's diplomatic experience told her that the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. Humanity's reputation for peaceful coexistence had been carefully cultivated to conceal their true capabilities. Most aliens had no idea that Earth's seemingly friendly merchants, researchers, and diplomats were part of the most sophisticated military intelligence network ever created. The hours were ticking down toward the moment when that network would reveal its true purpose. Chen had studied military history extensively as part of her diplomatic training, and she recognized the signs of an approaching storm that would reshape the galactic balance of power. War leader Thexmal concluded his speech to thunderous applause from his assembled commanders. The Korathian military was confident in their superiority, having never faced an enemy that could match their technological advantages. Their previous conquests had been against species that fought according to conventional military doctrine. Humans, however, had learned warfare in an environment where the stakes were always survival or extinction. Earth's military traditions had been forged through conflicts that lasted decades, involved entire planetary populations, and ended only when one side was completely unable to continue fighting. The concepts of limited war or negotiated settlement were foreign to human military thinking when survival was threatened. As Thexmal's commanders dispersed to prepare their ships for the coming invasion, none of them suspected that their every movement was being monitored and recorded. Human intelligence networks were tracking their supply lines, communication protocols, and defensive strategies in real time. The Korathian plan was straightforward and traditionally sound: mass their superior fleet, overwhelm human defenses through numerical advantage, and occupy key worlds before resistance could be organized. It was the same strategy they had used successfully for centuries. What they didn't understand was that humans had spent those same centuries developing countermeasures for exactly this type of assault. Earth's military academies taught their officers to think like predators rather than prey, to strike first and strike decisively when faced with an existential threat. Admiral Kane received the final intelligence updates as his fleet reached its attack positions. The Korathian forces were exactly where human intelligence had predicted they would be. Their defensive positions, fleet compositions, and command structures all matched the profiles that had been developed over months of careful observation. The only variable remaining was timing. Kane wanted the strikes to be perfectly coordinated to achieve maximum psychological impact. The Korathians needed to understand that they weren't facing a conventional military response, they were witnessing the deliberate extermination of their civilization. Kane checked his chronometer and opened a fleet-wide communication channel. His voice was calm and professional as he addressed the thousands of human warriors preparing to implement humanity's judgment on the Korathian Empire. "Today we send a message to the galaxy," Kane announced. "When you attack humanity, you don't face soldiers or fleets or governments. You face every human who has ever lived, every lesson we've learned, and every weapon we've built. You face the accumulated rage of a species that has survived everything the universe could throw at us. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. The Korathians chose to make this personal when they attacked Ambassador Chen. They wanted war. They're about to learn what war means when humans decide to fight it their way. Kane's finger hovered over the activation control that would initiate Operation Thunder God. Around him, his bridge crew waited with professional calm that concealed the anticipation they all felt. History was about to be written in plasma and quantum fire. All units, Kane commanded, initiate Thunder God. Show them why humans survived long enough to reach the stars. The quiet hour was over. The first strike came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Captain Reeves watched from her concealed position as the ESF Nemesis materialized inside the Korathian defensive perimeter around their homeworld. The stealth dreadnought had used quantum displacement technology to literally step sideways through dimensions, appearing in normal space exactly where human intelligence had calculated the enemy's blind spot would be. The Nemesis immediately launched a full spread of quantum torpedoes at the Korathian command ship, the massive vessel that served as war leader Thexmol's flagship. The weapons existed in a state of quantum superposition until they struck their target, making them impossible to intercept or detect until the moment of impact. Thexmol had exactly 3 seconds to register the impossible sight of a human warship appearing from empty space before his command deck exploded around him. The quantum torpedoes didn't just destroy the ship's structure, they destabilized the fundamental particles that comprised the hull, turning solid matter into expanding clouds of subatomic debris. The flagship's destruction was the signal for the rest of the human fleet to reveal itself. Across the Korathian home system, cloaked vessels dropped their stealth fields and opened fire with weapons that the enemy had never encountered before. The attack was precisely coordinated, with each human ship targeting specific Korathian vessels that had been identified during months of intelligence gathering. Admiral Vasquez's carrier group struck the Korathian orbital defense platforms with waves of fighters that seemed to phase in and out of reality. The enhanced human pilots, their reflexes accelerated by neural implants, moved their craft through combat maneuvers that should have been physically impossible. They struck with surgical precision, targeting shield generators, weapon systems, and command centers before vanishing back into the quantum foam. The Korathian defenders tried to respond according to their military training, but nothing had prepared them for an enemy that refused to follow conventional warfare rules. Their ships were designed to engage in honorable combat between roughly equivalent forces, not to defend against opponents who appeared from impossible directions and wielded weapons that violated known physics. War leader Thexmol survived the destruction of his flagship, escaping in an armored lifepod that ejected just before the quantum torpedoes struck. He watched in horror as his carefully assembled fleet was systematically destroyed by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. The humans weren't just winning the battle, they were demonstrating technological superiority that shouldn't have been possible. On the surface of Korathia Prime, the second phase of Operation Thunder God was beginning. Human Special Forces teams that had been infiltrated onto the planet months earlier emerged from hiding to strike at critical infrastructure targets. Communication centers, power generation facilities, and military command posts were eliminated simultaneously by soldiers who had trained for this specific mission. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone led Alpha Team through the corridors of the Planetary Defense Center, his squad moving with the precision that came from countless hours of rehearsal. They had studied every detail of the facility's layout, identified every security system, and planned for every possible contingency. The Korathian guards never had a chance to raise an alarm. Stone's team reached the primary control center just as the orbital battle was reaching its climax. The human soldiers moved with mechanical efficiency, planting charges that would disable the planet's defensive systems permanently. They weren't trying to capture the facility, they were ensuring it could never be used against humanity again. The explosions that followed the team's withdrawal sent seismic shockwaves throughout the planetary crust. The defense center had been built inside a mountain specifically to protect it from orbital bombardment, but human engineers had calculated exactly how much explosive force would be needed to cause a controlled collapse. The entire mountain came down, burying the facility under billions of tons of rock. Similar scenes were playing out across the Carathian Empire as human strike teams implemented plans that had been developed over years of careful preparation. Industrial centers, military bases, and communication hubs were all targeted simultaneously. The attacks were coordinated to create maximum disruption while minimizing civilian casualties. Humanity wanted to destroy Carathian military capability, not commit genocide. Dr. Foster's psychological operations teams launched their information warfare assault at the same moment as the kinetic strikes began. Every communication network in Carathian space was simultaneously flooded with broadcasts revealing the extent of human intelligence penetration. Military secrets, personal communications between leaders, and classified tactical information were released in a torrent that shattered any illusion of security. The psychological impact was devastating. Carathian society was built on concepts of honor and strength, but the human broadcasts revealed how completely their leadership had been outmaneuvered. Every major decision made by the Carathian government over the past 2 years had been known to human intelligence within hours. They had been living in an illusion of security while their enemies planned their destruction. Agent Harrison, still on the surface of Carathia Prime, transmitted his final intelligence reports as the planet's communication systems began failing. His years of careful infiltration had provided the targeting data that made the current assault possible. Now his mission was complete, and he activated the extraction beacon that would bring a human stealth ship to retrieve him. The beacon's signal was detected by the ESF Whisper, a specialized infiltration vessel that existed in a state of permanent quantum displacement. Captain Jennifer Liu guided her ship through the planet's atmosphere using technology that rendered it invisible to both sensors and naked eyes. The extraction was completed within minutes, adding another intelligence asset to humanity's growing advantage. Back in orbit, Admiral Kane was coordinating the assault from his flagship as the Carathian fleet continued to disintegrate under sustained human attack. The enemy's numerical advantage meant nothing when their ships couldn't detect or target their attackers effectively. Human vessels appeared, struck with devastating force, and vanished before return fire could be directed against them. The ESF Ragnarok, humanity's planet killer, moved into position above Carathia Prime's primary moon. The vessel's experimental quantum torpedo system began charging for a demonstration that would end any Carathian thoughts of continued resistance. The moon was uninhabited but strategically important as a military base and symbol of Carathian power. Admiral Zhang Wei coordinated the targeting solution from the Ragnarok's command center, her expression grim as she prepared to cross a line that no human military force had ever approached. The weapon they were about to test could destabilize planetary cores, turning entire worlds into expanding clouds of superheated gas. It represented the ultimate expression of humanity's determination to survive. The quantum torpedo launched from the Ragnarok appeared as a brief distortion in spacetime before striking the moon's surface. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the moon's structure began to unravel at the subatomic level as the weapon's exotic matter payload interacted with normal matter. The destruction was visible throughout the Carathian home system as the moon collapsed into itself before exploding outward in a sphere of plasma that briefly rivaled the system's star in brightness. The shockwave scattered debris across millions of kilometers, and the psychological impact on surviving Carathian forces was immediate and devastating. Thexmol watched the moon's destruction from his lifepod and, finally, understood the magnitude of his species' mistake. The humans hadn't just built better ships or developed superior tactics, they had created weapons that could eliminate entire worlds. The thought of such power in the hands of beings he had dismissed as primitives filled him with a terror unlike anything he had ever experienced. The realization that humanity possessed world-killing weapons spread rapidly through what remained of the Carathian fleet. Surrender calls began flooding the communication channels as ship commanders recognized that continued resistance would mean the destruction of their homeworld. The humans had demonstrated both the capability and willingness to commit planetary genocide if necessary. Admiral Kane received the surrender offers with cold satisfaction. The Carathians were finally beginning to understand what they had unleashed when they attacked Ambassador Chen. But surrender wasn't enough. Humanity needed to ensure that this lesson would never be forgotten by any species in the galaxy. Kane opened a communication channel to the surviving Carathian forces, his voice carrying across space to reach every ear that could hear it. War Leader Thexmol, you wanted to demonstrate Carathian strength by attacking our ambassador. You have succeeded in demonstrating something, but not what you intended. The Admiral's words were being recorded and broadcast throughout the galaxy by human intelligence networks. Every species would hear what came next, and the message would reshape galactic politics forever. You have demonstrated that humanity will not tolerate attacks on our people, Kane continued. You have shown the galaxy what happens when someone mistakes our preference for peace as weakness. And you have proven that when humans decide to fight, we don't seek victory, we seek the complete elimination of the threat. Kane paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. Your empire dies today, Thexmol. Your fleets are destroyed, your worlds are defenseless, and your people will remember this day as the moment they learned that some species in this galaxy are not prey. The Admiral's declaration was followed by the systematic destruction of every remaining Carathian military asset in the home system. Ships that attempted to surrender were boarded and captured. Those that tried to flee were hunted down by human vessels that could track them through hyperspace. Within 2 hours of the first attack, the mighty Carathian fleet had ceased to exist as a fighting force. But the real message wasn't being sent to the Carathians, it was being broadcast to every species in the galaxy through intelligence networks that most aliens never suspected existed. Humanity was announcing its true capabilities to a universe that had underestimated them for too long. The galaxy was about to learn that Earth's reputation for peaceful coexistence had been a carefully maintained facade concealing the most militaristic species ever to reach the stars. When humans felt threatened, they didn't just defend themselves, they eliminated threats so completely that no one else would ever make the same mistake. War Leader Thexmol's lifepod was tractored aboard the ESF Retribution as the last Carathian resistance ended. He would live to see his homeworld occupied by human forces, his people reduced to a client species that existed only at humanity's sufferance. The proud Carathian empire that had lasted 8 centuries was ending not with heroic last stands but with the whimpering surrender of beings who finally understood what real predators looked like. Thunder God was complete, but its echoes would resonate throughout the galaxy for generations to come. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of the medical station, her left arm still in a regeneration sleeve but her spirit unbroken. Below her, the former Carathian homeworld was being systematically occupied by human forces. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just 2 days ago, but the galaxy had learned that human capabilities extended far beyond what anyone had suspected. The occupation was proceeding with mechanical precision. Human marines moved through Carathian cities with the confidence of conquerors who had planned every detail of this moment for years. They carried translation devices that allowed them to communicate with the local population, offering protection to those who cooperated and swift justice to those who resisted. General Patricia Morrison commanded the occupation forces from her headquarters in the former Carathian capital. The building had once housed War Leader Thexmol's government, but human engineers had already begun modifying it to serve as the administrative center for what was now effectively a human protectorate. Morrison had studied the histories of successful occupations throughout human civilization, from ancient Rome to the post-war reconstructions of Earth's 20th century. The key was not just military dominance but the complete restructuring of society to prevent future threats from emerging. The Carathians would be allowed to maintain their culture and basic autonomy, but their ability to wage aggressive war would be permanently eliminated. The first step involved dismantling their military-industrial complex. Carathian shipyards that had produced warships for 8 centuries were being converted to civilian purposes under human supervision. The species' technological advantages in metallurgy and energy systems would be channeled into peaceful applications that would benefit the entire galaxy. War Leader Thexmol himself was being held in comfortable but secure confinement aboard the ESF Retribution. Admiral Kane had decided that the fallen Carathian leader would serve as a living reminder of what happened when humans were threatened. Thexmol would spend the rest of his life watching his empire be transformed into something unrecognizable. The psychological impact of the Carathian defeat was reverberating throughout the galaxy in ways that human intelligence had carefully calculated. Other militaristic species were quietly reviewing their expansion plans and reconsidering any aggressive intentions toward human space. The message was clear: humanity's peaceful reputation had been a choice, not a limitation. Dr. Foster's psychological operations teams were working overtime to manage the galactic response. The information warfare campaign had revealed not just human military capabilities but the sophisticated intelligence networks that had been operating in secret for decades. Every major alien government was now questioning how much humans actually knew about their internal affairs. On the council station, High Chancellor Mordun was struggling to maintain order as the political implications of humanity's victory became clear. The attack on Ambassador Chen had been viewed as a minor diplomatic incident by most species. The complete destruction of a major galactic empire in response had fundamentally altered the balance of power in ways that would take years to fully understand. The Altarian Confederacy, long considered the galaxy's primary mediating force, found themselves dealing with a species that operated according to rules no one else had understood. Humans had maintained the appearance of peaceful cooperation while building military capabilities that surpassed anything else in known space. Neutral species were scrambling to improve their relationships with humanity. Trade delegations, cultural exchange proposals, and diplomatic overtures flooded human embassies throughout the galaxy. Everyone wanted to ensure they were on the right side of a species that could eliminate entire civilizations in a matter of hours. The economic consequences of the Korathian defeat were equally dramatic. Director Chang's financial warfare campaign had demonstrated that humans controlled far more interstellar commerce than anyone had realized. The economic strangulation that had preceded the military strikes showed that humanity could destroy enemies without firing a single shot if necessary. Alien corporations that had maintained ties with the Korathian Empire found themselves facing mysterious difficulties that threatened their survival. Shipping delays, communication failures, and financial irregularities appeared with such frequency that it was clearly intentional. The message was unmistakable: those who supported humanity's enemies would share their fate. Captain Reeves was coordinating the intelligence harvest from captured Korathian facilities. The information being recovered would provide insights into alien military technologies, political structures, and strategic thinking that would benefit humanity for generations. The Korathians had kept detailed records of their interactions with dozens of species, creating an intelligence windfall of unprecedented scope. The data revealed that humanity's rise to galactic prominence had been viewed with suspicion and concern by many established civilizations. Several species had been quietly cooperating to limit human expansion, viewing Earth's growing influence as a threat to the existing order. That conspiracy had died with the Korathian fleet. Ambassador Chen received regular briefings on the political fallout from her hospital bed. The attack that had nearly killed her had triggered a response that reshaped galactic civilization in ways that decades of diplomatic negotiations could never have achieved. The irony was not lost on her that the greatest victory for human diplomacy had come through the complete abandonment of diplomatic solutions. Agent Harrison was being debriefed by intelligence analysts who were amazed by the depth of information he had gathered during his years undercover. His reports revealed a Korathian society that had been rotting from within, sustained only by military conquest and the exploitation of weaker species. The Empire's destruction had actually liberated dozens of worlds that had been held in brutal subjugation. The liberation of Korathian client species was proceeding smoothly under human supervision. Unlike their former masters, humans offered genuine autonomy in exchange for cooperation. The contrast was stark and deliberate. Humanity wanted to be seen as liberators rather than conquerors, despite the overwhelming force they had demonstrated. Lieutenant Colonel Stone was coordinating with civilian administrators to establish the new governmental structure for former Korathian territory. The occupation was temporary, designed to last only long enough to ensure that the threat would never re-emerge. Humans had no interest in ruling alien populations permanently, but they were determined to prevent future aggression. The trials of captured Korathian war criminals were being broadcast throughout the galaxy as part of humanity's broader psychological campaign. The proceedings revealed the extent of Korathian atrocities against conquered populations, justifying the harsh response and demonstrating that humans fought only against those who threatened innocent life. Vexstar, the warrior who had attacked Ambassador Chen, faced charges of attempted murder and violation of diplomatic immunity. His trial was being watched by billions of beings throughout the galaxy, serving as a reminder that attacks on human diplomats would be met with swift and overwhelming retaliation. The legal proceedings were conducted according to galactic law, but the outcome was never in doubt. Vextar's actions had been recorded from multiple angles, and his guilt was undeniable. The sentence would be life imprisonment on a human penal colony, where he would have decades to contemplate the consequences of his species' aggression. Admiral Kane was overseeing the transition from military occupation to civilian administration. The human military had achieved its objectives with minimal casualties, demonstrating both capability and restraint. The goal had never been wholesale slaughter but the elimination of a specific threat to human security. Kane's fleet was being redeployed throughout the galaxy to serve as a reminder of human power. The ships would visit neutral worlds, participate in joint exercises with allied species, and ensure that everyone understood the new reality. Humanity was no longer asking for acceptance, they were demanding respect. The ESF Ragnarok remained in orbit around the former Carathian homeworld as a permanent reminder of humanity's ultimate capabilities. The planet killer's presence sent a clear message: any species that threatened human interests would face not just military defeat but potential extinction. Director Mitchell was coordinating the expansion of human intelligence networks to fill the gaps left by the Carathian collapse. New agents were being recruited from species that had previously been hostile or neutral to human interests. The demonstration of human power had created opportunities for influence that had never existed before. The galaxy was entering a new era defined by human hegemony. The peaceful facade that humanity had maintained for decades was being replaced by the honest acknowledgement of their true capabilities. Other species would have to adapt to a reality where humans held ultimate authority over interstellar affairs. Ambassador Chen was finally cleared for release from the medical facility, her injuries fully healed by advanced human medical technology. She would return to diplomatic service, but the galaxy she would be working in had been fundamentally transformed by the events that began with an attempt on her life. As Chen prepared to leave the station, she reflected on the consequences of Vextar's attack. The Carathian warrior had intended to eliminate a troublesome negotiator and clear the way for his empire's expansion. Instead, he had triggered a response that eliminated his entire civilization and established humanity as the galaxy's dominant species. The lesson would be remembered for generations: attacking humanity's diplomats didn't just mean war with Earth's military forces. It meant facing the accumulated knowledge, capabilities, and determination of a species that had survived every threat their own planet could devise. The galaxy had learned to fear humans not because they were cruel or aggressive, but because they were utterly thorough. When humanity decided that something was a threat, they didn't just neutralize it, they eliminated it so completely that no one else would ever make the same mistake. War leader Thexmol had wanted to demonstrate Carathian strength by attacking a human diplomat. He had succeeded in demonstrating something, but it wasn't what he had intended. He had shown the galaxy what happened when someone mistook humanity's preference for peace as weakness. The Carathian Empire had lasted 800 years. It had taken humanity exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes to end it forever. That timing wasn't coincidental, it was carefully calculated to send a message that would resonate throughout galactic civilization. The message was simple: humanity had arrived, and the old order was dead. Ambassador Chen boarded her transport ship, looking forward to returning to the diplomatic work she loved. But she knew that her job had become much easier. When the galaxy's most accomplished diplomat carried the implicit backing of forces that could eliminate entire civilizations, negotiations tended to proceed very smoothly indeed. The galaxy was at peace, enforced by the species that had spent millennia learning to survive in a universe that seemed determined to destroy them. It was a peace that would last for as long as everyone remembered the lesson of the Carathian Empire. Some species were meant to rule. Others were meant to follow. And a very few were meant to ensure that the rules were never forgotten. Humanity had finally revealed which category they belonged to.